GTA Online is now 10 years old, and after over 40 DLCs spanning over those 10 years, you can imagine the game has changed quite substantially since the very beginning. As a day one player with over 9,000 hours of playtime in GTA Online, I have been there every step of the way. So in this video, to commemorate the 10-year anniversary of GTA Online, I want to look back at how PvP has evolved throughout the years and updates. If you're a newer player, this may teach you a thing or two about how GTA Online played out back then, and for my fellow long-time or day one players, then this should be a nice trip down memory lane. Starting off with the very beginning, the vanilla DLC list version of Grand Theft Auto Online. I want you to forget everything that you know about current day GTA Online PvP. 98% of the weaponized vehicles, Mark II weapons, the railgun, RC cars, the orbital cannon, none of that existed back then. 4 weaponized vehicles existed in 2013. The Laser Jet, the Rhino Tank, the Buzzard, and the Annihilator. The ones that would run online lobbies being the Laser and the Rhino, because the Rhino was in its super powerful form back then, especially with the only counter to it being a jet that you had to steal from the military base. Or another Rhino tank of your own that would cost you $1.5 million, which in 2013 was not easy to come by. To make matters worse, passive mode back then isn't like the passive mode we have today, where you go entirely invisible to other players. Passive mode on the 360 and PS3 only meant that you could not take damage from other players' weapons. You could still get ran over from other players' vehicles, so picture yourself getting spawn trapped by a tank, and you go passive mode. The tank can now still run you over and over again until you leave the lobby. There was truly no escape. For ground PvP, sniper dancing did not exist back then. In fact, you had to stand entirely still when scoping in, so it was whoever could line up their shot first as opposed to a dance-off like it is now. The early days of GTA Online truly felt like a different game entirely. The very early DLCs that GTA Online had didn't see the game change much from a PvP perspective. Most of them just added a few cars, some game modes, a couple of weapons that weren't all that good. That was until the Business and High Life updates. The Business update, released March 4th of 2014, brought in one of the most iconic GTA Online assault rifles that some argue is still best in class even today, the Special Carbine. It quickly became a fan favorite that people would use in RNG matches or just in general free mode combat, and it would stay that way for years. Then in the High Life update, the Zentorno released, one of the best supercars of the first few years of the game. And how this impacts PvP is that players quickly found out that the Zentorno was entirely bulletproof from the back, so in PvP, the common strat was you'd roll up on another player and just back up and reverse into them so they couldn't shoot you, forcing the other player to either use an explosive to blow up the car and pay the insurance fee, or die. Later that year in 2014, we got the Last Team Standing update, which brought a brand new game mode, of course named Last Team Standing. But for PvP, this actually was one of the most impactful DLCs to date, because for weaponry in this DLC, we got the Marksman Rifle, which completely changed how players sniped in PvP. No longer would you have to make sure you hit your shots, as the Marksman Rifle is basically entirely automatic. You can hold down the trigger, and since everyone had to stand still, it was pretty easy to hit players. There wasn't really a massive penalty for missing like there would be with the heavy sniper. It was a weapon that many players would complain about even to this day for its cheap spray and pray nature, but I would argue that back then it was even more overpowered than it is today, because today it truly is outclassed by the heavy sniper Mark II. Additionally, the Last Team Standing update would bring one of the tryhard's most prized accessories, the bulletproof helmet. While wearing this helmet, no longer could players die to just one headshot. And with no viable counters aside from a shotgun blast to the face, anyone who wore one of these in PvP would have a serious advantage over someone who did not. And soon after the Last Team Standing update, you often saw people dressed like this prancing around GTA Online lobbies with both the Marksman Rifle and the bulletproof helmet equipped at once. Free aim players still to this day despise the bulletproof helmet's existence because free aim is all about getting that one headshot, and if you have a helmet on, then that's an extreme advantage over someone who does not. It was also around this time when players would start becoming more experienced with the game's mechanics, with GTA Online now being just over a year old. The easy way out function would begin being used by players to avoid being killed by other players in combat, a start to a trend that still exists in current times. In November of 2014, GTA 5 and GTA Online released for the, at the time, next-gen consoles, the PS4 and Xbox One. With it came a myriad of changes. The first-person mode drastically changed how people played the game. It was at this moment that the sniper dance was born, as you could now move while aiming with the heavy sniper and marksman rifle, and in first person, the movement speed was crazy fast, much faster than third person, which led to it quickly becoming the meta in PvP. Passive mode was overhauled entirely. No longer when you went into passive mode could you get run over. Now when you went into passive mode, you became a ghost along with any vehicle you got into, preventing player collision entirely. This obviously fixed the issue of players getting repeatedly killed despite entering passive mode on the old gen, but added a brand new issue into the mix, because now players could use passive mode as a way to safeguard themselves when in danger by simply entering it mid-combat in a weaponized vehicle, and this was a big problem for many years. The festive surprise was the second time the game would celebrate the Christmas holiday. This time, adding in new weapons though, aside from just the snowy weather. The homing launcher, a weapon that players hoped would solve the jet griefing problem. That didn't exactly turn out as planned. Instead, the homing launcher marked the end of helicopter piloting for years to come, because remember, at this point in time, the only helicopters we had were the Buzzard or Annihilator. Helicopters with no armor or countermeasures. It also became the main rocket launcher players would use on foot due to its much faster rocket velocity and far greater max range than the RPG, while maintaining that same powerful blast radius that the RPG had. A few months into the new year, Rockstar would launch the much anticipated Heist update. 3 vehicles come to mind when I think of the Heist update. Number 1, the Armored Kuruma. Number 2, the Insurgent. And number 3, the Hydra. The Insurgent launched with 2 variants, the pickup which only could be used from Pegasus, and the regular Insurgent which became one of the most driven vehicles in free mode, as it was the strongest vehicle to defend against explosive weaponry. The Armored Kuruma was also a quite common vehicle in free mode, as this would replace the Zentorno for various vehicle drive-by purposes for the same reasons that players would either have to blow up the vehicle or die. Of course, you could still shoot a player out of the vehicle, but it was quite difficult to do, especially if the Kuruma had multiple players in the vehicle. However, despite these armored vehicles being added into the game, the Hydra was truly the main game changer here, because this is the first fighter jet that players could purchase in the game, armed with the most powerful weaponry that only the laser jet could match, meaning now players didn't have to make the trip all the way to Zancudo to get a jet, they just had to call it Pegasus and be on their way. And with the only counter being a well-timed lucky RPG shot, as the homing launcher couldn't really do anything against jets as long as they knew how to dodge them by going in a circle, jet griefing soon became out of hand, a problem that would linger for years to come. The Lowriders update had one huge addition that changed PvP forever, and that change was the ability to buy ammo through the interaction menu. No more going to ammunition to get ammo, or what people would do instead, just starting up a job and purchasing ammo from there and backing out of the job. Now you could buy all the ammo you wanted right through the interaction menu. Some see this as a positive change, while others think it contributed to the explosive spammy game we have today. And I think I'm inclined to agree with that statement. But either way, it wasn't long before we would see yet another controversial addition to PvP. When you think of the Executives and Other Criminals update, you might think of the Yacht, a property that really left a lot to be desired, especially at the time of release. But it was this DLC that added in the VIP menu, which gave you access to dropping BST at your feet with no cooldown, Ghost Organization, the abilities we see spammed today pretty much. There was also a very bad bug back then where if you started up a sightseer job, you would glitch everyone else's BST in the lobby so that they could no longer pick it up and use it while you still could, meaning you would have a serious advantage over someone else in PvP because you'd have double damage and double health with BST, and they couldn't do anything about it. None of the abilities from the VIP menu have been altered as of this video, so BST and Ghost Organization are still spammed today. If you're fighting a sweaty player who is a CEO, you pretty much have to assume they are using Bullshark Testosterone. In late spring of 2016, cargo grinding and, on the other end of the spectrum, cargo griefing were born. Finance and Felony brought in the first free mode business with the crate warehouses, an update style that Rockstar would follow suit for the upcoming years of updates. Before, if you got killed by someone in a jet, it was really no big deal. There were no serious stakes at hand. But now, you could spend hours grinding out an entire 111 crate warehouse, and when it was time to sell, which you had to do in a public lobby, mind you, one guy in a jet could ruin your entire day. The conflict between cargo grinders and cargo griefers immediately sparked, and it would only get worse as we got more and more cargo-based DLCs with sell missions that still required you to complete them in public sessions. The update to close out 2016 was good old import-export. I would say this is one of the more fan-favorite updates. Usually if you ask a player what their favorite updates were, this one comes up a lot, especially at the time it released. The special vehicles were very interesting though. This was Rockstar kind of dipping their toes in the water with vehicles that had special abilities or weapons to them. The Ruiner 2000 only had 8 homing missiles, but those missiles were insanely good at tracking targets. So good that the only time they miss is if there is an obstacle between you and your target, or if the jet outruns them. And if you used it in combination with the new foil-loaded free one mission at the time, you could get an armored Ruiner 2000 with unlimited missiles for 20 minutes that in the right hands could cause a lot of damage. However, the regular versions of these vehicles themselves were very underpowered, especially if you compare them to the vehicles of today. The ramp buggy would set on fire after ramping 20 cars. Same with the Phantom Wedge. It almost felt like these were intentionally designed to be weak, or they were afraid of making them too strong. Which is exactly why I say this was them testing the waters for what would come out the following year. "2017 would be the year that saw the most amount of changes and additions by far for GT Online. In just a span of 6 months, we got Gun Running, Smuggler's Run, and the Doomsday Heist, a trio of DLCs that really upped the weaponization of the game tenfold. Gun Running introduced Mark II weapons with Mark II weapon upgrades, with the most controversial one being explosive rounds on the Heavy Sniper Mark II. This would alleviate some of the jet griefing problems, but not entirely. Other special ammo types included FMJ, which did more damage to vehicles and also pierces right through bulletproof glass, and armor-piercing rounds countered bulletproof helmets after so many years. The batch of new weaponized vehicles and armored vehicles like the APC tank, the half-track, the trusty Night Shark that is still one of the best vehicles in the game were all added in this update. And one of the most iconic vehicles at the time, a flying bike named the Oppressor, made its debut. Rockstar absolutely went all in on the militarization of the game in this DLC. Then a couple months later in August of 2017, the Smuggler's Run update released. And with it, aircraft combat changed forever. No longer were the Laser and Hydra the only fighter jets in the game. A new wave of weaponized aircraft made their debut. The Starling, the Pyro, the Seabreeze, among many others. These planes outclassed the old Laser and Hydra in agility, spicing up the air-to-air combat a lot. And what these planes had in common over the Hydra and Laser is that they were upgradable. You could equip them with armor that would allow them to tank more shots than the Laser and Hydra. The handling could be improved, performance upgrades, the introduction of countermeasures like chaff and flares to counter lock-on missiles, and we of course can't forget the addition of the bombs. This update really did a great job to fill that gigantic void in air combat and really just expanded it with so many new additions. The bombs on the planes were a very skill-based way of taking out targets on the ground, in a time where everyone was still fed up with the laser cannons. If you became a good pilot in one of these new planes, you felt like a god because not even the Laser or Hydra could stop you anymore. It truly was the Aircraft 2.0 update we've always wanted. And in my opinion, this was the time that GT Online PvP was at its peak. I still consider Smuggler's Run to be one of the most balanced updates aside from the BoOmStiCk. Bigger planes are still terrible, but the amount of fun I had with the new planes and the Hunter in this update really is still unmatched today. Unfortunately though, the best times for GT Online PvP only lasted a few short months, because in December of 2017, the Doomsday Heist was released. And what a fitting name it was. This was the Doomsday for PvP. The orbital cannon is one of the worst additions to an online game that I have ever seen in my entire life. That alone ruins a good portion of PvP, and still does today, with players able to teleport right to a cannon that can kill you from anywhere on the map with virtually no chance of missing, from the safety of their underground property. No longer did it matter if you were good in a specific vehicle. Someone could just teleport to the facility and orb you and take you out of that vehicle. If you were ruling the skies with your skill in one of the Smuggler's Run planes, someone could quite easily just end that right away with the orbital cannon. It was also a feature that was exploited to no end with countless glitches to spam it or to get around the cooldown or payment of the cannon, things that were meant to balance it. A lot of PvP from here on out turned into stalemate matches of two players looking at their maps, making sure they don't get orbed. The Deluxo also partially ruined air combat as it had missiles that tracked like the Ruiner 2000, but it could fly. And at the time that the Doomsday Heist update released, the Deluxo also had a speed glitch that made the Deluxo fly way faster than even the fastest jet in the game could go. The quality of PvP took a seriously deep dive post Doomsday Heist, despite other cool vehicles being added like the Stromberg or the jetpack. All of that was overshadowed by the immense balance issues that the orbital cannon caused in PvP. Moving into the 2018 updates, things took a turn for the worse. In the After Hours update released in July of that year, players would find a flying motorcycle in the game files called the Oppressor Mark II. An already controversial vehicle from gun running got a second variation, and this one would completely ruin vehicle balance for years. It eventually was released to the public on August 14th in the drip feed, and immediately this vehicle was broken, carrying 20 missiles with insane accuracy, almost rivaling the Ruiner 2000. It was also insanely quick and agile, and combined with its size, it made it nearly impossible for any air vehicle to take it out. And that's not to include the speed glitch that it had, where all you had to do was tilt it up and down to get a super speed boost. Did I mention you could also spawn this directly next to you in an instant through the Motorcycle Club menu? As you could imagine, the Oppressor Mark II would go on to become the most complained about vehicle in the community within the modern age of the game. Air combat at this point was dead. All someone had to do was spawn in an Oppressor Mark II next to them from the MC menu and chase you down. Smugglers Run aircraft, and especially helicopters, couldn't do much about it aside from escape. Before, if someone was getting attacked by a vehicle, the thing that they would turn to would be another jet, or some sort of Smugglers Run aircraft or helicopter, and a dogfight would ensue. After the Oppressor Mark II released, if someone was getting attacked, they would grab the Oppressor Mark II. I really just can't put into words how much this vehicle messed up the game's flow of combat. The Arena War DLC in December of 2018 didn't exactly help out either. Arena War brought in the RC Bandito, a car that could be spammed with a 1-minute cooldown that was armored more than most vehicles in the game, and could also detonate to blow up anyone on foot that you want. So now ground combat was infested with people who would just spam RC cars, though it wasn't all that bad as you could use it to also block the orbital cannon shots, but we're talking about using a busted feature to counter another busted feature. At that point, the game is still an unbalanced mess of BS. One good thing did come out of the Arena War update though, the Up and Atomizer, a goofy weapon to use in PvP that can cause some funny kills and moments. Entering 2019, it seemed that Rockstar finally caught on to the frustration that players were feeling about certain mechanics and vehicles within the game, and this was when they would start making some much needed changes, starting with passive mode. When the casino update released, passive mode was no longer able to be used in weaponized vehicles, nor could you enter passive mode if you recently killed someone. You now would have to wait 2 minutes. This was a monumental change that I vouched for years up until that point. However, the game still, of course, had issues, major ones in fact, but that was a good starting point. The Casino Heist update in the later half of the year addressed the easy way out functionality where you would now have to wait a 5-minute cooldown before you could use it again because people would abuse it in PvP. That didn't exactly address the issues of players blowing themselves up mid-fight though. What needs to still happen is if you injure someone and they blow themselves up, the last player who damaged the player would get the kill for it. This was also the update where the Oppressor Mark II would get its first nerf, a 5-minute cooldown, but again, that would not do much to help with how powerful it was in combat. "2020 and beyond is what I consider the modern era for GTA Online to be. The few standouts in 2020 for PvP for me are definitely the Toreador. This is essentially a successor to the Stromberg. It works out very nicely as a counter to the Oppressor Mark II, which was still overpowered at the time. The Sparrow helicopter is also a very nice addition, and the Kasatka missiles gave players yet another cheap way to play, as you can just warp around the map after getting kills with it. The Toreador, though, I still think is the biggest change to PvP that we saw in 2020. 2021 was an interesting time because it finally added in something to counter lock-on homing missiles. UNEDITED upgrades could be added to a now growing list of vehicles which would block lock-on entirely from vehicle homing missiles and the regular homing launcher that you can use on foot. It also allowed you to drive regular vehicles again, or at least as close to regular vehicles as possible, because these UNEDITED cars often had armor plating options to put on them as well. So it quickly became a common thing to just clown on Oppressor Mark II players that would try to blow you up in one of these vehicles, laughing about the fact that they can't lock on, so they look so clueless trying to hit you. A symbol of just how brain dead the PvP had become at that point. 3 years of Oppressor Mark II brain rot. That brings us into the most recent times. The past 3 updates have really been a lot about balancing different aspects of the game that have plagued it for so long. In the Criminal Enterprises update released in July of 2022, the Oppressor Mark II was finally nerfed in the way that it needed to be after almost 4 years of destruction and it just ruining the game entirely. The missile accuracy was significantly decreased, the countermeasures were made less effective. This was the nerf that we wanted years ago. KD ratio was removed from free mode, meaning kills and deaths in free mode don't count towards your KD anymore. Only in death matches they do. Overall, it was a very good point in time, but a lot of damage had already been done in those 4 years. They were way too slow at fixing those problems. The railgun would eventually be brought over to GT Online in the Jug Wars update in 2022, a weapon that seemed to be put in the game to put a nail in the coffin for jet griefing. However, in doing so, this was a even bigger nail in the coffin for any use of aerial vehicles, including the already useless helicopters. The final nail in the coffin for jet griefing would come out in our most recent update in 2023, the San Andreas Mercenaries, where the laser and hydro cannons finally saw a nerf to their effectiveness. 7+ years after jet griefing became a major problem in public lobbies, they finally were nerfed. The orbital cannon was also nerfed so you don't get a refund for missing anymore, a change made after 6 years of dealing with that BS. While these are much respected quality of life changes, something needs to be said about how long these took to implement. These were not problems that happened overnight. These problems have been rooted in the game for years, that only now they cared to finally do something about. As for what's next for GT Online in terms of PvP, one can only hope that they continue on the path of improving vehicles that underperform and nerfing vehicles that overperform. However, I don't think anything is going to come close to the magic that was post-Smuggler's Run pre-Doomsday PvP. Let me know down below, when did you guys start playing GT Online? Have you been through it all, or did you just start playing recently? And let me know what your favorite era of PvP was in GT Online as well. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, feel free to leave a like as well as subscribe to my channel for more GTA Online content. I want to give a huge shout out to all my channel members for your support. If you'd like to become a member for some exclusive perks, you can either use the join button or the link that's down in the description. Happy 10-year anniversary to GTA Online, and as always, thanks for watching and have a great day.